Hi folks, this is Andrew from Award Consulting, and today I want to share everything you need to know about STIR/SHAKEN in 3 minutes for independent telcos. It's going to be a challenge, so I'm going to talk fast. First off, STIR/SHAKEN is all about stopping robocalls. We don't like robocalls, the FCC doesn't like robocalls, so we want to stop them. The way you can stop them is by knowing who the robocallers are and by preventing those calls from being delivered to the subscribers. Simple, right? Except it's not, because in the PSTN it is very hard to know if the caller ID, the calling number that appears on a call, is actually accurate or not. And that's where STIR/SHAKEN comes in. STIR/SHAKEN itself does not actually stop robocalls. STIR/SHAKEN is a way of validating, signing with a certificate, the caller ID on a call that goes through the network so that when the recipient receives it, they can know for sure that the person who says they sent it really did send it. And that's great, but it doesn't actually stop robocalls themselves. So the first important thing you need to know is that STIR/SHAKEN authenticates caller ID, which is a necessary but not sufficient condition to block robocalls. Having implemented STIR/SHAKEN network-wide, which is what the FCC is currently pushing for, we will then individually as telcos need to implement some kind of data analytics software on incoming calls to our network that will assess whether or not these are likely to be robocalls. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about how STIR/SHAKEN works, but the main thing you need to know is that service providers sending calls out into the network over SIP can add an extra header to the call, which includes a certificate verifying that they, the service provider, put their hand up and say, I confirm that the caller ID here is correct for this call. And then at the far end, the recipient can verify that that is a valid certificate. But one small issue you might notice here is that that only works over SIP. It doesn't work for SS7, doesn't work for TDM, and it actually requires SIP throughout the entire network. It needs to maintain that SIP header from the originating service provider all the way to the terminating service provider, and that itself can also be a problem. But that begs the question, what do we do about TDM? There are basically two schools of thought on this at the moment. The first is that TDM is dying anyway, and soon everyone will be able to send all calls over SIP, and we want to encourage this to happen. This is good for the world, and so maybe this is a good opportunity to push the entire PSTN to move towards SIP. I think this is great. I just think it's going to take a while. The other idea is that TDM is going to take a long time to die, so we need to find some kind of intermediate workaround. And one of the proposed options is a draft spec called out-of-band STIR, which basically uses the same technology as STIR/SHAKEN, but instead of sending the SIP header through the network in-band over the SIP headers, then instead the certificates are stored in a central server which the service providers can look at. And so even if the call passes through the PSTN over TDM circuits, the certificate can still be inspected. That's great too, but fundamentally that is one more thing that you need everyone in the network to agree on, and right now they don't. So for TDM at this point, I shrug and say it's a problem that is not yet solved and it needs to be. And the FCC is working on it, and hopefully they will come up with a solution and they will push everyone to implement that. Setting that aside, the question is, what do we have to do now? So right now, the FCC has proposed a deadline of June 30th, 2021 for everybody to implement STIR/SHAKEN over voice over IP, over SIP. That deadline is coming quickly, but the FCC has also, as I record this in May 2020, proposed that maybe they extend that deadline for small service providers, those under 100,000 subscribers. So maybe we'll get an extra year. Nevertheless, we need to implement it. So if you're an independent telco wondering what to do next, then here's what I suggest. First, do something. Yes, the deadline's a while away and it may get extended, but as of today, the tier ones are already doing STIR/SHAKEN on their calls, and I've seen instances where they're starting to block calls from subscribers like yours because the calls are not signed. So it's worth doing even without the FCC mandate. Secondly, focus on VoIP for now and talk to your switch vendor, Ribbon, Metaswitch, whoever. Also consider options like IntelliQuint and TransNexus. So you've got a few different ways to approach this, and the right solution may vary depending on your network setup, the different devices you've got in your network, etc. If you need help figuring out your approach, or if you have a Metaswitch and you're interested in us taking care of the implementation for you so you don't have to figure out the process, then be sure to get in touch because we will be offering a service to do just that. So make sure you're on our email list or contact me in the comments to get added to that. And then for TDM, I think we have to kind of see what's going to play out in the marketplace. Out-of-band stir might be a solution, but it will only work if everyone accepts it. Beyond that, I'm imagining that the FCC will have to extend the deadline a lot for TDM devices because ultimately it's going to take a long time before AT&T and Frontier and CenturyLink and all those folks offer VoIP for their tandem interconnect. Hopefully that's been useful. If you've got any questions, put them in the comments. Thanks very much.